The sharp, insistent trill of the landline sliced through the quiet hum of my corner office on the 42nd floor. I glanced at the digital display, my brow furrowing as I saw Preston's name flashing urgently at 10:30 on a Tuesday morning. My husband never called during billable hours, certainly not when he knew I was drowning in due diligence for the massive merger of the season. A heavy knot of dread tightened in my stomach instantly. When I answered, his voice wasn't the warm baritone I had woken up to for 15 years. It was cold, metallic, stripped of all humanity like a pre-recorded message delivering a death sentence. "Victoria, we need to end this. I want a divorce." He said it without a greeting, without a preamble. Just 8 words that incinerated a decade and a half of partnership with the casual indifference of someone canceling a gym membership. I gripped the receiver so hard the plastic creaked, my knuckles turning the color of bone. Outside my floor-to-ceiling window, the gray Chicago skyline stood impassive, unaware that my entire universe was collapsing in real time. "Preston. What on earth are you talking about? Is this some twisted joke?" My voice betrayed me, sounding thin and breathless, alien to my own ears. I stood up on shaky legs, my hip bumping the heavy obsidian paperweight, a gift from our 10th anniversary, sending it skittering dangerously close to the edge of my mahogany desk. "It's not a joke, Victoria. I've already moved my essentials to the club. Arthur Blackwood will be handling the logistics from this point forward. Do not attempt to contact me personally. All communication goes through my lawyer." The finality in his tone was a physical blow. There was no crack in the armor for negotiation, no space for a why. "You cannot simply dismantle our marriage over a phone call, Preston. We are adults. We need to discuss this face to face," I pleaded, loathing the tremor of desperation leaking into my tone. I was Victoria Sterling, the contract attorney who made CEOs sweat through their Italian suits during depositions. I didn't beg. Yet, here I was, clinging to the phone cord like it was an oxygen line. "There is nothing to discuss. My decision is final." A pause, heavy with unsaid things. "You've changed, Victoria. We both have. It's cleaner this way." The line clicked dead before I could draw a breath, leaving me staring at my own ghostly reflection in the rain-streaked glass. A powerful woman in a bespoke blazer, looking like a lost child. A moment later, Elena, my assistant of 7 years, peeked her head in. "Vic, are you all right? You look like you've seen a phantom." She knew my micro-expressions better than anyone. I motioned for her to shut the heavy oak door. "Preston just called. He wants a divorce." Speaking the words into the air made them solid, heavy, suffocating. Elena's eyes went wide. "What? But you two were the golden couple at the firm's gala just last month." She rushed over, sinking into the client chair opposite me. I collapsed back into my leather seat, the adrenaline draining away to leave pure exhaustion. Apparently, it was all a performance. He told me not to contact him, said everything has to go through his lawyer, Arthur Blackwood. Elena's face shifted from shock to protective fury. "Blackwood? The corporate shark from Sterling and Cooper? Preston is bringing a bazooka to a knife fight." She leaned in, her voice low. "Victoria, you need to wake up. Blackwood doesn't handle amicable splits. He destroys people." I nodded, the fog of emotional shock beginning to lift as years of legal conditioning kicked in. "I know exactly who Arthur Blackwood is. He handled 3 of Preston's hostile takeovers." A realization struck me like a lightning bolt. "But he's never touched a family law case. He is strictly corporate." "Maybe Preston thinks hiring a corporate pit bull will scare you into signing whatever scraps they offer," Elena suggested, her loyalty vibrating in the air. "Perhaps." I opened my laptop, my fingers flying across the keyboard with renewed purpose. Or maybe Preston forgot that his wife has spent the last 15 years becoming the most feared contract attorney in this city. The irony was bitter on my tongue. When we met, I was a 22-year-old hostess at a bistro where Preston was an investor. He was 32, already a mogul, charming, and magnetic. I had been swept away by his orbit. I remembered how he used to brag to his golf buddies about his brilliant wife when I graduated top of my class. "My Victoria is a force of nature," he would say, squeezing my waist. Clearly, he hadn't calculated what it would mean to have that force of nature turned against him in court. "I need to clear my docket for the next 72 hours, I told Elena, my voice steadying. "Get Harrison to take lead on the merger." "And Elena? I need you to dig." Find out everything about Preston's financials, travel logs, credit card statements for the last 6 months. If he wants a war, he's going to get one. Consider it done, Elena said, already typing on her phone. What about the board meeting? Reschedule. Family emergency. The lie tasted like ash, and not a word to anyone yet. After she left, I stared at the framed photo on my desk, Preston and me in Tuscany, smiling like we owned the world. I tried to reconcile that man with the cold voice on the phone. What had I missed? I pulled up our shared digital calendar, scrolling back through the last 6 months. The signs were there, hiding in plain sight. Late nights at the office. Business trips that had doubled in frequency. Gym sessions at midnight. The realization hit me, cleaner and sharper than the grief. Preston wasn't just leaving. He was cheating. He was seeing a mistress. Tears pricked my eyes hot, angry tears I hadn't shed since my mother passed. I set the timer on my phone for exactly 5 minutes. 5 minutes to be the heartbroken wife. 5 minutes to mourn the assets of a life we built together. 5 minutes to feel the sting of betrayal. When the alarm buzzed, I dried my eyes, fixed my mascara, and unlocked my secure terminal. It was time to find out exactly how much this cheating was going to cost him in alimony. By noon, I had transformed my office into a war room. The Westlake corporate merger files were pushed to the side, replaced by the forensic deconstruction of my own marriage. I logged into our joint banking portal, the cursor blinking like a heartbeat on the screen. It didn't take a forensic accountant to spot the anomalies. It just took a wife who finally decided to look. There were charges that screamed betrayal. The Four Seasons, downtown. Why would my husband need a hotel suite 15 minutes away from our penthouse? There were debit charges for expensive jewelry from Cartier pieces I had certainly never received. Intimate dinners at Le Bernardine on nights he claimed he was pulling all-nighters reviewing acquisitions for the restaurant group. The evidence mounted on my screen, pixelated proof of his double life. Each new discovery felt like a paper cut small, sharp, and accumulating into a deep, throbbing wound. But the most damning proof came when I pulled the itemized bill for our cellular provider. Preston had opened a second line 3 months ago. I traced the activity log. Hundreds of texts and late-night calls to the same unrecognized number. I couldn't access the content of the messages. I wasn't a criminal attorney, and I respected the boundaries of the law, mostly, but the pattern was undeniable. It was a digital map of intimacy. Preston was seeing someone else. I was reaching for the phone to call the provider when my inbox pinged with a high-priority notification. It was from Arthur Blackwood. Subject: Proposed separation agreement and settlement terms. Attached was a document outlining a settlement that made my blood run cold then boil hot. Preston was offering me the city apartment and a modest monthly stipend for 5 years. In exchange, I would relinquish all claims to his business holdings, which constituted the vast majority of our marital assets. It was insulting. Not just financially, but viscerally. After 15 years? After I had supported him when the first bistro was just a leaky basement in the village? After I had personally reviewed every one of the contracts for his expansion into the tri-state area? He thought he could buy me off with the equivalent of pocket change. He thought I was just the wife. I smiled for the first time that day. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the dangerous, shark-like grin I usually reserved for opposing counsel right before I dismantled their case in a deposition. Preston had forgotten something crucial, a dormant landmine buried in our past. Before I became Victoria Sterling, Esquire, I was a cautious, skeptical 22-year-old. And before I walked down the aisle, I had signed a prenuptial agreement. An agreement that Preston, in his arrogance, had insisted upon to protect his burgeoning empire from a young wife he feared might be a gold digger. I replied to Blackwood's email, accepting the meeting but changing the venue to his office. Neutral ground is for uncertain parties, Arthur. I muttered to the empty room. Then, I initiated my own defensive maneuvers. I called our private banker, a man who feared me more than he liked Preston, and instructed him to freeze the suspicious transfers Preston had initiated that morning from our joint investment account. That evening, I returned to our penthouse for the first time since the call. The space felt cavernous, stripped of warmth. His favorite Patek Philippe watch was gone from the nightstand. His closet had gaps where his suits used to hang. But he had left the bulk of his life behind, arrogant enough to believe he could dictate the timeline of his retrieval. I walked straight to his home office. Behind a pretentious abstract painting he'd bought at an auction to impress a client, sat the wall safe. The combination was the date we met. He hadn't changed it. Inside, stacked beneath a pile of old legal briefs and tax returns, was the document I needed. I removed the prenuptial agreement, blew off a thin layer of dust and flipped to Section 7, Paragraph 3. The language was formal, rigid, and absolutely beautiful. In the event that either party engages in provable infidelity, the aggrieved spouse shall be entitled to 50% of the offending spouse's business assets acquired during the marriage, in addition to the standard division of marital property. Preston had insisted on this clause. "It's just protection, Victoria," he had said with that patronizing smirk, swirling his scotch. "To keep us both honest." He had created a sword to hold over my head, never imagining that 15 years later, I would be the one to pick it up and swing it. I slept in the guest room that night, the document on the nightstand like a loaded weapon. Before I turned out the light, I sent a single text to the mystery number from Preston's secret phone log. "We need to talk about Preston." Then I turned off my phone. Let them sweat. The next morning, I woke up with a clarity that usually only comes after a fever breaks. The fear from yesterday had evaporated, replaced by a cold, crystalline resolve. I didn't dress for a funeral. I dressed for a hostile takeover. I chose my armor with deliberate precision, a slate gray Armani power suit that Preston had once complained was too aggressive for dinner parties. I fastened the sapphire studs that matched my eyes cold and blue and strapped on my vintage Cartier tank watch. It wasn't just jewelry. It was a reminder that time was now ticking on my schedule, not his. I gathered the documents I needed, organizing them into my leather attaché case with the same meticulous care I applied to billion-dollar contracts. First, the prenuptial agreement, specifically the pages detailing the division of assets. Second, the printouts of the credit card statements, the phone logs, and the hotel receipts, the tangible paper trail of his betrayal. I paused, looking at the stack. It wasn't just paper, it was leverage. I added a few legal briefs I had drafted overnight, outlining the precedents for enforcing infidelity clauses in high-net-worth divorces in the state of New York. If Arthur Blackwood wanted a legal battle, I would bring him an entire war library. I caught a glimpse of myself in the hallway mirror before leaving. The heartbroken wife was gone. In her place stood Victoria Sterling, Esquire, a woman who ate sharks like Blackwood for breakfast. I took an Uber Black to Midtown, arriving at the gleaming glass tower of Sterling and Cooper at 11 a.m. The receptionist at the front desk, a young woman with a headset who looked barely out of college, blinked up at me in confusion. "Name?" she asked, popping her gum. "Mrs. Sterling," I said, my voice smooth but carrying the undeniable weight of authority. "To see Arthur Blackwood." Her eyes darted to her screen. "Oh. Mrs. Sterling. Mr. Blackwood's calendar says you aren't due until 3 p.m. this afternoon." I found myself with an opening in my schedule. I lied, flashing a smile that didn't reach my eyes. It was the same smile I used when presenting a non-negotiable term sheet during a corporate merger. "Is Arthur available now?" Well, he's in between calls, but it's rather irregular," she stammered. "It's urgent," I said, leaning forward slightly, encroaching on her space just enough to make her uncomfortable. "And it concerns the immediate disposition of significant holdings." She hesitated, then picked up her phone, murmuring into it too quietly for me to hear. After a tense moment, she nodded, her face flushing. "He can see you now. Follow me, please." As I walked down the plush corridor lined with expensive modern art, I mentally rehearsed the opening moves. I knew the layout of firms like this. The corner offices were designed to intimidate: glass walls, expansive views, heavy furniture. They were stages built for performance, designed to make the client feel small and the attorney feel like a god. But I wasn't a client. As I walked into Arthur Blackwood's corner office, I saw him rising from behind an imposing oak desk that looked like it cost more than most people's cars. He extended a hand in greeting, his smile practiced and professional, though it didn't quite hide the glint of pity in his eyes. He was a small man with wire-rimmed glasses and a reputation for ruthlessness that belied his mild appearance. "Mrs. Sterling, I presume." "I'm Arthur Blackwood." His tone was professional, soothing, the voice one uses with a grieving widow or a hysterical woman. "Please, come in, though you are quite early." "Victoria," I corrected him instantly, ignoring the chair he gestured toward. I set my briefcase on his desk with a decisive, heavy click. And yes, I'm early. In my experience, waiting gives the opposition too much time to hide their settlements. The moment I spoke those words, the air in the room shifted. Blackwood's extended hand froze in midair. His eyebrows twitched together as recognition slowly dawned behind his wire-rimmed spectacles. He tilted his head, studying me not as a spurned wife but as something vaguely familiar. "You're Victoria Sterling," he said slowly, the smooth confident veneer cracking just a fraction. "From Jenkins and Sterling." "That's right," I said, finally taking his hand in a firm, bone-crushing shake. "I believe you and I sat on opposite sides of the negotiation table for the Anderson acquisitions last year. You tried to bury the environmental liability clause in the appendix. I caught it." Arthur Blackwood, one of the most feared corporate attorneys in Chicago, visibly swallowed. His hand trembled slightly as he withdrew it. "Small world," I added, my voice dropping an octave. I knew in that moment that I had the upper hand. Preston had made a critical, fatal error. He had forgotten that his wife wasn't just a domestic accessory he could discard. She was a gladiator who specialized in the very contracts he was trying to use to strangle her. Blackwood gestured for me to take a seat, his movements stiff and mechanical, a stark contrast to the fluid arrogance he had displayed 10 seconds ago. He sat down, adjusting his tie, recalibrating his entire strategy in real time. The floor-to-ceiling windows behind him showcased the city skyline. But his view today was occupied entirely by a woman he suddenly realized was not the pushover client he had anticipated. "This is unexpected," he murmured, clearing his throat. "Preston didn't mention your professional standing." "I imagine there are many things Preston failed to mention," I said coolly. I sat down, crossing my legs and resting my hands on the arms of the chair, perfectly relaxed. "Like the fact that he's been funding a second life with our marital funds." Blackwood stiffened. "Allegations are not facts, Victoria. We are here to discuss an amicable separation. We are here," I corrected him, "to discuss a surrender." "I have a copy of the proposed agreement here," Blackwood said, tapping a pristine blue folder to his right. He was trying to regain control, to steer the ship back into waters he understood. "Preston is prepared to be generous, considering the circumstances." "I'm sure he is," I replied, my voice dry. "But I wonder if Preston directed your attention to the original contract that supersedes this proposal. Specifically, the prenuptial agreement we signed 15 years ago." I opened my briefcase and removed my own folder, black, sleek, ominous. I placed it carefully on the polished mahogany surface of his desk. "I assume you've read it?" I asked. "I have glanced at it," Blackwood admitted, his eyes flicking to the folder. "Standard boilerplate for the time. Separate property remains separate. You might want to glance at Section 7, Paragraph 3 again," I said, sliding my copy across the desk. I had opened it to the relevant page, the infidelity clause highlighted in a neon yellow that was impossible to ignore. As Blackwood read, I watched his face undergo a fascinating transformation. It cycled through confusion, then realization, and finally, genuine alarm. He looked up at me, then back down at the document, as though hoping the words might rearrange themselves into something less catastrophic. "This is quite specific," he said finally, his voice tight. "Yes, it is," I agreed pleasantly. "Preston was very insistent about that clause when we married. He was terribly concerned that a young wife might be tempted to stray. He wanted to ensure that if I cheated, I would leave with nothing." I leaned forward, my eyes locking onto his. "Ironic, isn't it? That he built his own guillotine." Blackwood removed his glasses and pinched the bridge of his nose, a gesture of a man who realized he was charging by the hour for a losing battle. "Victoria, proving infidelity in a court of law is notoriously difficult. It requires more than suspicion. It requires concrete, irrefutable evidence. I'm glad you brought that up." I reached into my briefcase again and pulled out the second folder. This one was thicker. I placed it on the desk with a heavy thud. "Credit card statements showing hotel rooms in the city on Tuesday nights," I listed, ticking them off on my fingers. "Receipts for diamond earrings I never received. Flight manifests for business trips where he booked 2 seats. And, of course, the phone records." I paused for effect. "Hundreds of calls to a number registered to a Miss Kayla Bennett. I believe she's a hostess at his flagship restaurant." Blackwood stared at the evidence folder. his expression growing increasingly troubled. He looked like a man watching a train wreck in slow motion. "Perhaps we should reschedule this meeting," he said, his hand hovering over his intercom. "I need to consult with my client." "By all means," I said, leaning back and crossing my legs. "I'll wait." "That's not necessary. I can call you when." "I'll wait," I repeated, my voice dropping to a register that brokered no argument. "I have nowhere else to be. And frankly, Arthur, I think Preston needs to hear this from you immediately." Blackwood hesitated, then nodded curtly. He picked up his phone and turned slightly away from me as he dialed, but in the quiet office, I could hear every word. "Preston, we need to talk. Now." A pause. "No, it can't wait." Another pause, longer this time. "Your wife is here." "Yes, in my office." He listened for a moment, his expression darkening. "Preston, did you ever actually read your prenuptial agreement? The one you insisted on?" The response on the other end must have been negative or perhaps explosive because Blackwood closed his eyes briefly, wincing. "There's an infidelity clause, Preston. 50% of business assets acquired during the marriage. That includes the restaurant group, the holdings in the new development, everything." Even from across the desk, I could hear the tinny, distorted sound of Preston shouting. Blackwood held the phone away from his ear for a moment before responding. "Yes, she has evidence, quite a lot of it, from what I can see." "And Preston," he frowned, looking at me with a mixture of annoyance and grudging respect. "She's a contract attorney. Did you know that?" "A very good one." A long silence followed. "I see," Blackwood said finally. "Well, that complicates things significantly. Get down here. Now." When he finally hung up, Blackwood looked at me with something approaching professional camaraderie. The mask of the shark had slipped, revealing the weary lawyer beneath. "He's on his way," Blackwood said. "He'd like to discuss this privately." "I'm sure he would," I said, reclaiming my evidence folders and returning them to my briefcase. "Unfortunately for him, that's not how this works anymore. All communication goes through you." Remember his words. Not mine. "Victoria, be reasonable," Blackwood sighed. 15 years of marriage deserves a conversation. At least 15 years of marriage deserved better than a phone call ending it, I countered, feeling a flash of the hurt I'd suppressed beneath my professional demeanor. Preston made his choice. Now he can live with the consequences. We sat in uncomfortable silence for nearly 20 minutes. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner seemed to grow louder with each passing second. Blackwood pretended to review a file. I stared out the window at the city I had helped Preston conquer, a city I was about to carve up. Then the door burst open. Preston stormed in, his normally perfect appearance slightly disheveled. His tie was loosened, his hair windblown. He stopped short when he saw me, as though surprised to find me actually sitting there, calm and composed in the chair he paid for. His eyes, the warm brown that had once made my heart race, were cold and furious now. "Victoria," he said. Just my name, flat and emotionless. "Preston." I remained seated, refusing to be rattled by his physical presence. I didn't stand. I didn't flinch. He turned to Blackwood, jerking his head toward the door. "Give us the room." The attorney looked relieved to escape the blast radius. He quickly gathered some papers and stood up. "I'll be in the conference room next door. Call me if you need." Mediation. The door clicked shut behind him, leaving us alone. The silence stretched, taut as a piano wire, ready to snap. Once we were alone, Preston paced to the window, turning his back to me. The tension in his shoulders was visible beneath his tailored suit jacket. He was composing himself, putting on the mask he wore for board meetings and press conferences. "This is low, Victoria," he said finally, his voice tight. "Even for a shark like you. Using a technicality to try to seize half my life's work." "A technicality?" I repeated, my voice dripping with incredulity. "You mean the specific clause in the contracts that you insisted on drafting? The one designed to protect you from me?" He spun around, his expression hard and ugly. "That was different." "How?" I challenged. "Because you never imagined I'd be the one enforcing it. Or because you didn't think I'd find out about Kayla." His eyes widened slightly at the name. It was a micro-reaction, barely a flicker, but for a man who prided himself on being unreadable, it was a scream. "How did you?" He cut himself off. "It doesn't matter." What matters is that you are trying to destroy the business because you're hurt. No, Preston. What matters is that you broke the contract. Both the marriage and the legal agreement that came with it. He ran a hand through his dark hair, now streaked with distinguished silver. It was a gesture so familiar it made my chest ache with a phantom pain. Look, I know this is a shock. I handled the notification badly. But we can be reasonable about this. Reasonable? I echoed, standing up slowly. Like serving divorce papers through your attorney while I was in the middle of a corporate merger? Like emptying our joint investment account without discussion? That kind of reasonable? I was angry, he admitted, moving to sit in Blackwood's chair, instinctively trying to reclaim a position of authority. You've been so focused on your career these past few years, Victoria. Always working late on legal briefs. Always distracted. We barely talk anymore. I was lonely. I stared at him, stunned by the breathtaking audacity. Are you seriously trying to justify your affair by blaming my work ethic? The same work ethic that helped build your empire? It's not that simple. He leaned forward, his expression softening into that charming, boyish smile that had once made me weak at the knees. It was a weapon, and he was aiming it right at my heart. Vic, honey, we've grown apart. These things happen. But we can end this amicably. The settlements offer I had Arthur draft is generous. Generous? I cut him off, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay ice cold. 20% of what I am legally entitled to is not generous, Preston. It is insulting. The prenup was never meant to be used like this, he argued, frustration bleeding into his tone, cracking the charm. It was just a formality. Then you shouldn't have insisted on it. I gathered my briefcase, snapping the locks shut with a loud click. Or you shouldn't have cheated. Either way, we are beyond negotiating directly. As you said, all communication goes through the attorneys from now on. Preston stood up too, his height allowing him to tower over me. It was an intimidation tactic he'd used in the past when arguments weren't going his way, using his physical presence to dominate the space. Don't do this, Victoria. You will regret it. I held my ground, looking up at him steadily. No, Preston. You will regret assuming I was still that naive 22-year-old who didn't understand what she was signing. As I turned to leave, he grabbed my arm. Wait. Just wait. His voice had lost its edge, sounding almost pleading. What do you want? Just tell me what you want. And we can make this go away without lawyers destroying the company. For a brief, heartbreaking moment, I allowed myself to imagine saying what I truly wanted, for none of this to be happening. For the man I'd loved for 15 years not to have betrayed me, for the life we'd built together not to be crumbling. But that wasn't possible anymore. That life was a ghost. I want what I am entitled to under the agreement you created, I said, gently but firmly removing his hand from my arm. 50% of the business assets acquired during our marriage, 50% of the real estate holdings, and an equitable division of our personal property. That would bankruptcy the restaurant group, he protested, pale. We are in the middle of an expansion. The new locations in Chicago and Boston should have been considerations before you decided to sleep with a 2-year-old hostess. I finished for him. He froze. How did you think this would end, Preston? Did you really believe I would just accept whatever scraps you offered and disappear quietly into the night? The door opened before he could respond, and Arthur Blackwood returned, looking uncomfortable, sensing the oxygen had been sucked out of the room. I thought I heard raised voices, Blackwood said tentatively. Is everything all right? Perfect timing, I said, moving toward the door, my head held high. We are finished here. Preston has some decisions to make, and I have a deposition at 2. I paused at the threshold, looking back at the two men, the shark and the narcissist, both suddenly looking very small. I'll expect a revised settlement offer by the end of the week, Mr. Blackwood. One that reflects the terms of our prenuptial agreement in full. I left without looking back, maintaining my composure like a statue until the heavy glass doors of the building closed behind me and I reached the privacy of the elevator. Only then did I allow my shoulders to slump. My carefully constructed facade cracked under the weight of what had just transpired. The Preston I thought I knew, the man who had encouraged my education, celebrated my successes, built a life with me, was gone. He had been replaced by a stranger who looked at me like a liability on a balance sheet. My phone buzzed with a text from Elena. How did it go? Do you need backup? I have a bottle of tequila and a shovel ready. I smiled faintly at her loyalty. Meeting over. Coming back to the office. Put away the shovel. When I returned to my firm, I found Harrison, my mentor, waiting in my office. His distinguished face was creased with concern. In his late 50s, Harrison had been the one who encouraged me to specialize in contract law and had eventually made me a name partner. Elena told me what happened, he said, rising as I entered. I am so sorry, Victoria. I set down my briefcase and sank into my chair, suddenly feeling the weight of every year we had been married. Thank you. It has been an educational 24 hours. Do you need representation? I know someone excellent in family law. I can handle it, I interrupted, then softened my tone. But thank you. I appreciate the offer. Harrison studied me for a moment. This isn't just another case, Vic. It's your marriage. Your life. Having emotional distance might be beneficial. I shook my head. Preston made this about business when he tried to cheat me out of my assets. I won't let personal feelings interfere with getting a fair result. And after? Harrison asked gently. When the papers are signed and the holdings are divided. What then? It was a question I hadn't allowed myself to consider yet. After 15 years with Preston, who was I on my own? I don't know, I admitted, surprising myself with the honesty. I guess I'll figure that out when I get there. Harrison nodded, patting my shoulder as he stood to leave. You are stronger than you think, Victoria. You always have been. Once alone, I found myself staring at the wedding photo on my desk. I picked it up, tracing Preston's smiling face with my finger. Had he ever really loved me? Or had I simply been a young, impressionable trophy to display at business functions until I became too successful, too independent, too much? My thoughts were interrupted by another text message, this one from an unknown number. This is Kayla. Can we meet? There's something you should know about Preston. I stared at the message, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Kayla. The mistress. The woman who had helped detonate my marriage was reaching out directly. My first instinct was to delete it. What could she possibly have to say that I would want to hear? An apology? A taunt? But the lawyer in me, the part that hunted for leverage, recognized potential information. If Preston's mistress was contacting his wife, there was trouble in paradise. After a long moment, I typed back, the Atrium Cafe, tomorrow, noon. That night, I began the painful, surgical process of separating my life from Preston's. I moved his remaining clothes to the guest room, treating his Italian suits like biohazard material. I deleted our shared playlists. I removed his emergency contact information from my phone. Each action felt like cutting a thread that had tethered us together, leaving me feeling lighter but also untethered, drifting in open space. In the home office, I found a photo that made me pause. It was Preston and me at the opening of his first upscale restaurant, the Montague. I was beaming with pride, my arm around his waist as he cut the ceremonial ribbon. That night he'd toasted me in front of everyone. To my brilliant wife, without whom none of this would be possible. Since then, the restaurant had thrived, expanding into a group that now included 8 locations across 3 states. And I had been there for every step, reviewing contracts, helping with business plans, even suggesting the farm-to-table concept that had become their signature. In many ways, the success of Preston's business was my achievement, too. I set the photo down, a new resolution forming like steel in my spine. This divorce wouldn't just be about getting what I was legally entitled to. It would be about acknowledging my contributions. Preston might have forgotten them, but I would make sure the settlement reflected them. The next morning, I dressed carefully for my meeting with Kayla. I chose a simple but expensive cream blouse and tailored pants, approachable but undeniably successful. This wasn't a business meeting or a legal confrontation. It was something messier. I arrived at the Atrium Cafe 10 minutes early, selecting a quiet table in the corner with a clear view of the entrance. At precisely noon, a young woman walked in. She was stunning. Tall, blonde, with the kind of effortless, glowing beauty that belongs to the very young. She couldn't have been more than 22, exactly the age I had been when I met Preston. Our eyes met across the cafe, and I saw recognition flash in hers. She straightened her shoulders and walked toward me, her confidence seemingly returning with each step, though I noticed a slight tremor in her hands. Victoria? She asked, her voice higher and softer than I had imagined. Kayla, I acknowledged, gesturing to the seat across from me. Please, sit down. She slid into the chair, fidgeting with the strap of her designer handbag, a recent Prada that I recognized from the collection Preston had bought me for Christmas 3 years ago. The irony was suffocating. Thank you for meeting me, she began, her eyes a clear, bright blue, meeting mine directly. I know this must be weird. That's one word for it, I agreed, keeping my tone neutral. You said there was something I should know about Preston. Kayla took a deep breath, as if preparing to jump off a cliff. He's been lying to you, but he's been lying to me, too. She opened her purse and removed a small stack of papers, placing them on the table between us. He told me you two were already separated, that you had agreed to divorce months ago but were keeping it quiet for business reasons related to the merger. I felt a fresh wave of anger at Preston's manipulation, but I kept my expression controlled. When did this start? Between you two. 6 months ago. I was hostessing at the Boston location during the opening. Preston was there for 2 weeks, overseeing everything. Her cheeks flushed slightly. He was charming, attentive, made me feel special. Said I had potential to move up in the company. The timeline aligned perfectly with the changes I'd noticed. The late nights. The distant look in his eyes. And you believed him? About us being separated? She nodded, looking down at her hands. He even showed me papers. What he said were preliminary divorce documents you'd both signed. She pushed the stack toward me. These? I picked them up, recognizing immediately what they were. They were drafts of business contracts, with signature pages from old documents attached. A crude forgery that would never have held up to legal scrutiny for a second, but enough to convince a 22-year-old who wanted to believe a wealthy, powerful man loved her. He brought me to New York 3 months ago, Kayla continued. Set me up in an apartment, promised to help advance my modeling career. Her voice hardened slightly. But then I started noticing things. He would never take me to certain restaurants. Never introduced me to his close friends. Always had excuses for why I couldn't visit his home. Because we were still very much married, I finished for her, setting the papers down. And living together. She nodded, blinking back tears. I found out the truth yesterday, after your text. I did some research. Found articles about you and Preston together at events just last month. She looked up at me, her expression a mix of anger and shame. I feel so stupid. Despite everything, despite the pain she represented, I felt a flicker of sympathy. She was young, manipulated by a man twice her age with wealth and power. You're not the first woman Preston has charmed, I said quietly. And probably not the last. There are others besides me. Her eyes widened in shock. I shook my head. Not that I know of. But he charmed me the same way once. When I was about your age. Kayla's gaze sharpened with interest. You were my age. When you met him? 22? 22, I confirmed, signaling to the waiter for coffee. I hadn't planned on having a real conversation with this woman, but something about her directness made me reconsider. I was working as a receptionist at an advertising agency that handled his first restaurant's marketing. He was 32, already successful, confident, charming. Kayla finished with a small, knowing smile. Like he's the only person in the room who really sees you. I nodded, surprised by how accurately she'd captured it. Exactly like that. The waiter arrived with my coffee, and Kayla ordered an iced tea. When he left, she leaned forward. So, what happened? How did you go from receptionist to? She gestured vaguely at my designer watch, my tailored clothes, the obvious markers of success. This? Preston happened, in part, I admitted. He encouraged me to go back to school. Paid for my undergraduate degree. Supported me through law school. He was proud of my accomplishments. I stirred my coffee, watching the dark liquid swirl. At least. I thought he was. He talked about you sometimes, Kayla said quietly. Said you were brilliant but that you'd grown cold. Too focused on your career. Too obsessed with legal briefs. The words stung, even coming from her. And I suppose he presented himself as the neglected husband? She nodded, looking embarrassed. He said you two hadn't been intimate in over a year. That you were essentially roommates. She twisted the paper wrapper from her straw. I'm guessing that wasn't true either. No, I said simply. It wasn't. Some details were too private to share, especially with the woman who had been sleeping with my husband. Preston appears to have created convenient narratives for both of us. Our drinks arrived, creating a brief pause. I studied Kayla more carefully. She was beautiful, yes, but there was an intelligence in her eyes that suggested she was more than the stereotype. What do you want from this meeting, Kayla? I asked finally. You said you had something to tell me about Preston, but it seems you've mostly confirmed what I already suspected. She straightened, setting her drink aside. I have texts, emails, receipts, everything documenting our relationship for the past 6 months. I want you to have them. She reached into her purse and pulled out a USB drive, placing it on the table. He lied to both of us. Used both of us. I don't want him to get away with it. I stared at the small device. With this evidence, Richard was seeing someone else confirmed in high definition. There would be no way for Preston to deny the affair or contest the prenuptial clause. It was the nuclear option. Why would you help me? I asked. You don't know me. Kayla's expression hardened. Because yesterday, after I confronted him about still being married, he told me I was just a fun distraction. That I should be realistic about my position. Then he offered me money to disappear quietly. Her voice cracked slightly, like I was a problem to be handled, not a person he'd been telling he loved for months. The cold calculation sounded exactly like the Preston I'd seen in Blackwood's office, not the man I thought I'd married, but the man he had become. I'm sorry, I said, and meant it. You didn't deserve that. I'll be fine, she shrugged, attempting nonchalance but failing. I'm young, as he kept reminding me, but you and I both deserve better than his lies. She pushed the USB drive closer. Take it, use it, make him pay. I picked up the drive, turning it over in my fingers. Thank you. This will help significantly with my case. Good. She took a sip of her tea. What happens now with the divorce? Now I negotiate from a position of strength, I explained, slipping the drive into my purse. With this evidence and the prenuptial agreement, Preston will have to agree to the terms I set forward. And those terms include half his business? Kayla asked, a hint of admiration in her voice. 50% of the business assets acquired during our marriage, I corrected, which includes the restaurant group, various real estate holdings, and several investment portfolios. She whistled softly. No wonder he looked terrified when I mentioned speaking to you. He stands to lose a fortune. He should have thought of that before he decided to cheat, I said sharply, then softened. But this isn't about punishment, Kayla. It's about getting what I legally deserve after 15 years of contributions. Kayla nodded, looking thoughtful. For what it's worth. I think you're handling this with a lot more class than most people would. She hesitated. He showed me pictures of you sometimes. From events. You always looked so confident, so put together. I was actually kind of intimidated by the idea of you. The comment startled a laugh out of me. Me? You're young and beautiful. If anyone should feel intimidated, it's me. Beauty fades, she said with surprising wisdom. But what you've built for yourself, your career, your reputation, that's real power. She gathered her purse, preparing to leave. I should go. I have a casting across town. What will you do now? I asked, genuinely curious. Move back to Boston. Probably. My sister's there. Start over. She stood, smoothing her dress. Maybe go back to school. I always wanted to study design. You should, I encouraged. It's never too late to reinvent yourself. She smiled a genuine, radiant expression. Thank you for meeting me, Victoria. And, for what it's worth, I think Preston made a huge mistake letting you go. After she left, I sat alone with my coffee, processing. I had come ready to face an adversary. Instead, I'd found another victim. Different circumstances, same manipulation. I returned to the office to find 3 messages from Arthur Blackwood. Apparently, Preston had instructed him to schedule another meeting. He was ready to settle. I called Blackwood back immediately. I've acquired additional evidence confirming Preston's infidelity. I informed him without preamble. Comprehensive documentation. I'm prepared to move forward with enforcing the prenuptial agreement in full. There was a long silence. I see, Blackwood said, his tone resigned. Perhaps we should discuss potential settlement options before proceeding to court. I think that would be wise, I agreed. I'll have my terms drafted by tomorrow morning. That evening, I began the process of truly reclaiming my narrative. I transferred my essential belongings to a luxury short-term rental in Tribeca I'd secured that afternoon. I needed neutral ground, a space with white walls and zero history, where the air didn't smell like Preston's cologne or the dying embers of a 15-year marriage. Sitting at a glass dining table that felt cool under my palms, I opened my laptop to draft the final terms. I worked with the surgical precision of a surgeon, ensuring every clause was airtight, every claim justified by state law and the ironclad language of our prenuptial agreement. By midnight, the document was complete. It was fair, but it was formidable. I would receive 50% of the restaurant group's equity, half of our real estate portfolio, and an equitable division of our liquid assets. Preston would retain operational control, but he would answer to a board that now included me as a primary voting member. As I closed my laptop, I expected to feel grief. Instead, I felt lighter. The silence in the apartment wasn't lonely. It was liberating. The next 3 weeks were a blur of valuation meetings and stiff negotiations. Faced with the irrefutable evidence of his affair and the binding nature of the contract he had once demanded, Preston had no room to maneuver. Arthur Blackwood, pragmatist that he was, advised his client to capitulate rather than endure a public humiliation in court. The actual signing was anticlimactic. We sat across from each other in Blackwood's conference room, the vast mahogany table acting as a final barrier between us. Preston looked tired, the silver in his hair seeming more prominent, the lines around his eyes deeper. The arrogance that had defined him for so long was gone, replaced by a weary resignation. When the final signature was inked, we stood up. At the door, Preston paused. "Victoria," he said softly. I turned, meeting his eyes one last time as his wife. "I am sorry," he said, and for the first time in months it sounded genuine, not for the divorce that was probably inevitable, but for how I handled it. "You deserved better than a phone call." I studied him, this man who had been my world, then my adversary, and now, simply my business partner. "Yes," I agreed simply. I did. Walking out into the bright, crisp spring air of Manhattan, I felt like I was stepping into a different frequency. The legal battle was over. Now came the harder work, figuring out who Victoria Sterling was when she wasn't Mrs. Preston Montgomery. The answer unfolded over the next year. With my equity in the restaurant group, I established myself as a formidable board member, forcing the company to adopt the sustainable practices I had always championed. Preston, initially resistant, eventually came to rely on my legal acumen as we expanded into international markets. My career at the firm exploded. Harrison appointed me to head a new division specializing in hospitality law. The work was challenging, lucrative, and entirely mine. On a personal level, I reclaimed the parts of myself I had pruned away to fit into Preston's garden. I took up sculling on the Hudson, waking up at dawn to feel the burn in my muscles and watch the sun rise over the city. I traveled to Kyoto and Buenos Aires alone, eating dinner in restaurants without worrying if the chef knew my husband. 6 months after the divorce, I received an email from Kayla. She was back in Boston, enrolled in a graphic design program. Attached was a photo of her first portfolio project, a branding concept that showed real, raw talent. "Thank you for not destroying me," she wrote. "I'm finally learning to build something of my own." I smiled as I replied, "Keep building, Kayla." 1 year to the day after Preston's call, I attended the grand opening of our new flagship location in Soho. The space was magnificent, warm lighting, reclaimed wood, buzzing with the city's elite. I found myself standing near the bar, watching the room. Preston approached, holding 2 glasses of champagne. He looked good, but different. Humbled. "Congratulations," he said, handing me a glass. "The critics are calling it a triumph. Your sustainability framework is the headline." "Our concept," I corrected gently. "Your culinary vision, my infrastructure. We make a decent team, Preston." He nodded, a shadow of wistfulness crossing his face. "Better business partners than spouses, apparently." "Perhaps," I agreed. "Or perhaps we just outgrew the people we were when we met." "Do you ever wonder," he asked suddenly, "what would have happened if we met now? As equals?" I considered it honestly. I think we might have had a chance. But we can't litigate the past. "No," he said, clinking his glass against mine. "To the future, then." As he moved away to greet a senator, I felt a tap on my shoulder. I turned to see Elena, grinning mischievously. Don't look now, but there is a very distinguished antitrust attorney near the entrance who has been scanning the room for the last 10 minutes. Harrison says he flew in from D.C. just for tonight. I looked toward the door. Julian Vance was there, looking devastating in a tuxedo, searching the crowd. When his eyes found mine, his face lit up with that warm, intelligent smile I had thought about more than I cared to admit. Go, Elena whispered. You're ready. And as I walked toward him, I realized she was right. The divorce that I thought was an ending had been a violent, necessary birth. The pain of betrayal was part of my story, but it was no longer the headline. Preston's attempt to discard me had ultimately set me free. The prenuptial agreement he used to protect himself had become the instrument of his own reckoning. The young receptionist who was dazzled by a CEO had become a woman who owned the company. Later that night, as I accepted the Woman of the Year award from the Bar Association, I looked out at the sea of faces. I saw Preston in the back, clapping respectfully. I saw Harrison beaming like a proud father. And in the front row, I saw Julian, watching me with a look that wasn't intimidation, but pure, unadulterated admiration. Sometimes, I told the room, my voice ringing clear and strong, the hardest contracts to negotiate are the ones we make with ourselves. To know our worth, to refuse to settle for less, and to have the courage to walk away when the terms are no longer fair. I raised my award. This is for the woman I was, who survived. And for the woman I am, who is just getting started.